The next thing that we're going to do is build out a new endpoint called transaction/broadcast. So let's do that now. We are going to say app.post to /transaction/broadcast with a callback function, the request, response. Okay. Cool. So what this endpoint will do is anytime that we want to create a transaction from now on, we are going to hit this transaction/broadcast endpoint. We are not going to hit this transaction endpoint. And what this transaction broadcast endpoint will do is it will do two things. One is that it will create a new transaction. Two is that it will broadcast that new transaction to all the other nodes in our network. So let's build this out now. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to say const new transaction equals Bitcoin dot create new transaction, which is this method that we just updated right here. And this method takes in an amount, a sender, and a recipient. And we are going to assume that all of that data is being sent in on the rec body. So we're going to pass in rec.body.amount, rec.body.sender, and rec.body.recipient. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add this new transaction to the pending transactions array on this node. So we're going to say Bitcoin dot, and this is where we are going to use the new method we just created called add transaction to pending transactions. So I'm going to copy this and paste it right here. And we're simply going to take this new transaction and pass it into this method. So now we are creating a new transaction and we're placing it in the pending transactions array on this node inside of our network. The next thing that we have to do is we have to broadcast this new transaction to all the other nodes inside of our network. So we're going to say Bitcoin.network nodes for each network node URL, and inside of here is where we are going to broadcast. So in order to broadcast to all the other nodes in the network, we are going to make requests to the transaction endpoint on all the other nodes inside of our network. So let's define some options for our request. So we'll say const request options equals an object. Our first option, the URI, will be our network node URL plus the endpoint transaction. Our next option will be the method, which will be post. Next, we want to send along the data, which is the body, and the body is simply going to be the new transaction. We are going to send the new transaction as the body of this request. And finally, we just want to say JSON true. Cool. Now, let's make this request. So we will use our request promise library that we have used many times before when creating our blockchain network. And we will say RP, our request options. Now, just like we did when we were broadcasting a new node to the entire network, we created an array of promises and we pushed all of our requests into that array. so that we could run all of the requests at the same time. And we're going to do the same thing for our transactions. So up here, we'll create an array of promises by saying const request promises equals an array. Now we are going to do request promises dot push, and we are going to push all of our requests into this promises array. So after our whole for loop has ran, we should have all of these requests present inside of our request promises array. So now we need to run all of those requests by saying promise.all and passing in our request promises array. Cool. And then finally, after our requests have all ran, we will say .then and pass in a function that takes in the data that's returned. And we're actually not going to use this data that comes back from all of these requests, but we are simply going to send a response, because at this point, the entire broadcast is done. We have broadcasted the new transaction to all of the nodes inside of our network. And we have ran all of those requests. So now at this point, our entire broadcast is done. It's pretty straightforward. So now that the broadcast is done, we simply want to send a response that says the broadcast was successful. So we will say res.json, and we'll send an object that has the note that says transaction created and broadcast successfully. Cool. And that's it for our transaction broadcast endpoint. To run through it from top to bottom real quick, the first thing that we are doing is creating a new transaction by using our create new transaction method. We then take that new transaction and we push it into our pending transactions array that we have on this current node that we're on. Next, we have to broadcast this new transaction to all the other nodes inside of our network. So that's what we're doing right here. We cycle through every node inside of our network, and we send the new transaction to each node at their /transaction endpoint. After we have created all of these requests, we then run them by using promise.all and passing in the array of requests. Once all the requests are completed in our .then statement, we know that the broadcast has finished, so we simply send back the response, transaction created and broadcast successfully. Cool. Now, the next thing that we're going to do in the next video is we are going to change this /transaction endpoint so that it works with the broadcast that we're doing. After we refactor this transaction endpoint, we will test both our transaction broadcast endpoint and our transaction endpoint to make sure that they're both working together correctly. Cool. I'll see you in the next video.